위대한 수령 김일성 동지께서 서거하셨을 때 하늘로부터 수천 마리의 학이 그분을 모시려 내려왔다. 그러나 학들은 그분을 모시고 갈 수 없었다.
The most beloved leader isn't dead. Not only does he live on in the hearts of all Koreans who are forced to wear his picture on their person, but he really hasn't died. He's asleep alone in his immense mausoleum. It is the myth that Kim Il-sung carefully created about himself over the past 50 years, and which most Koreans still firmly believe in. When he died in 1994, the world saw images of a nation in a trance. Tens of thousands of North Koreans were weeping hysterically, and their tears were genuine, it seemed.
시청자 여러분, 위대한 여호와의 수령님을 잃은
True or false? It's a question that applies to almost everything in North Korea. We received permission to travel across the country under strict supervision, and the only conclusion that we were able to draw at the end of this week was that we now understood even less of what goes on in this country. The Pyongyang subway. For these North Koreans, this may well be their first encounter with a foreigner. Even so, they're careful not to look us in the eye. It's against the law. Automaton-like, they pass by the thousands. We're at the station Rebirth and travelling to Glory. The last stop is Paradise, but we're not permitted to go there. It's questionable whether anyone's ever been there. Welcome to North Korea.
Sat down in this chair and taught us that the desk should be remained conveniently for the readers to regulate the sitting height, and the surface of the desk should be made sloping so as to conveniently for reading. Yeah. So as you see, this desk is made to regulate sitting height and slope according to the sitting height of the readers. You see? You can regulate the sitting height.
This is an ordinary weekday, but nevertheless typical. The location is the study house of the people, the only library in the capital. We're taken on a guided tour by one of the selected ones, someone with permission to talk to foreigners. Without any trace of irony whatsoever, she attributes superhuman achievements to the most beloved leader again and again, while for almost an hour we wander through this extremely costly, almost empty palace. No doubt just one critical remark by this woman directed against the regime could condemn her to a life in the labor camps. So we resist the temptation to ask her whether or not she really believes what she says, because one of the three people shadowing us is always within hearing distance.
I think you know this book. This book is the reminiscence of the great leader Kim Il-sung.
I haven't.
Now this book has been published in 8 volumes. And then you see this book, Kim Il-sung was.
For over 50 years now, even after his death, Kim Il-sung has held the North Koreans under a mythical spell. How can people stand to be enslaved for so long, even to the point of starvation? Why do people accept it? It's the hallmark of an oppressive government, as we notice immediately after arriving in the country. The guides confiscate our passports and drive to a 35-meter-high bronze monument of the great leader. For the North Koreans, this is a shrine. The guides suggest that we lay flowers and bow out of respect for Kim Il-sung. Coming from them, it is in fact an order. As we're about to find out, there's no avoiding it. We have to show just as much respect here as any other Korean, bowing before the mythical leader.
So wait, little friend Kim Il-sung make the bow.
Okay.
Driving through the city, we pass thousands and thousands of children that seem to be practicing for something. The roads are almost deserted, fuel shortage as a result of isolation. Monstrous hotels are forever under construction. The economy is dead. Our 45-story high hotel is virtually empty. We were warned in advance that the rooms would be bugged and that luggage and garbage cans would be carefully scrutinized. We will have no individual freedom whatsoever for the rest of this week. The hotel room finally offers an opportunity to observe without being observed. How these people cope with their fate is anybody's guess. For the visitor, it's a sobering experience to realize that personal freedom ends outside the hotel room, the harsh reality of life in the People's Republic of Korea. Just to be clear, this is a hotel consisting of 2 towers, each 45 stories high. It's virtually empty. In all, perhaps 20 people stay here overnight. In fact, the only people you meet are hotel personnel watching over their 3 guests. Music from loudspeakers all over town wakes everybody up at 7 in the morning. The streets are immaculate. The final cleaner is ready to go home. A policewoman is directing traffic that doesn't exist. There are no elderly people in the streets. Most of them have been relocated to places outside the city borders. Those that stay behind are encouraged to stay indoors, as are the handicapped. They don't fit in the desired picture. We move from monument to museum to exhibition, a never-ending stream of information about Kim Il-sung and his son Kim Jong-il, the present leader, and about 3,078 volumes of the Yuchi doctrine, outlining Kim Il-sung's personal teachings, only under our own steam. Everywhere in town you see the Yuchi Tower. Kim Il-sung also created a Yuchi calendar, starting with his own birthday in 1911. It's only after some time that we realize what is so strange about all these places we visit. There's no one else, just us. We're the only visitors wherever we go. At palaces, monuments, industrial exhibitions, we never run into any other guests. Just guides, whose main job it is to wait for a few visitors each week. Our guides belong to the selected ones, North Koreans who speak English, German or French, and who have permission to talk to foreigners. The rest is total emptiness. This monument, for instance, erected in 1996 to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the North Korean Workers' Party. The North Koreans have added the brush to the communist hammer and sickle to symbolize the literacy of the people.
This monument has a round-built structure. This round-built symbolizes the firm unity of our people, closely united around the Workers' Party of Korea. Outer diameter of the build is 50 meters, symbolizing 50th anniversary of the Workers' Party of Korea foundation. The great leader Comrade Kim Il-sung formed the town with the Imperialism Union in 1926. His foundation has a diameter of 70 meters. 70 meters means this monument was set up on the 7th year from the year 1926. As you can see, this monument faces the stark Man's Hill, on which stands the bronze statue of the great leader, President Kim Il-sung. The bronze statue of the great leader symbolizes the slogan, "Long live the great leader, Comrade Kim Il-sung."
The city is the ideal calling card for the country, but it turns out to be no more than an empty front. Outrageously expensive buildings, but no one to marvel at them. It doesn't take much to discover that most of this pomp and circumstance hides emptiness underneath. Its sole purpose is to present an ideal picture to the visitors and to uphold the morale of the population. At the so-called Palace of the Children, our guide is a 12-year-old girl. The reception we're given is heartwarming, but the children that perform there were selected because they look healthy. But at the same time, their contemporaries in the country are dying of starvation. Such are the established facts. Hall after hall, there are hundreds of children ready to perform to their foreign guests. The chauffeur drives like a madman along the empty boulevards in town. Requests to pull over because of something interesting are ignored. Our chaperones have orders to keep us away from civilians. Any observations and interpretations can be made from inside the car only. For instance, the fact that all children are carrying wooden sticks.
What are they carrying?
Torch, 주체 torch.
I see.
They're learning mass gymnastics.
I see.
Here we are at the Kim Il-sung Square, the center of central Pyongyang.
In every square in the city, people are practicing. Many thousands of children are being drilled for a mass manifestation in 2 months' time. On the 10th of October, the Labour Party will be celebrating its 55th anniversary. In this square alone, 50,000 children will symbolize the support for the father and son Kim. They practice 6 hours a day, all the way until October. Our chaperones are not sure that we can film the children in the square, and eventually they tell us not to. However, when we do as we please, they don't protest. Suddenly we realize that we're witnessing history in the making here. A history that unravels in perfect isolation from the rest of the world, in a different era. 50,000 children just to honor the leader. The myth-building around father and son Kim dominates everything in North Korea. In this impoverished country, 20 million people are forced to preserve the most grotesque personality cult in the world. Fairy tale-like fabrications about father and son Kim are presented as fact, and the population have no other choice but to swallow. Birds often play a central role in these stories. The crane, for instance, symbolizes eternal life, an example of popular wisdom that is carefully exploited by the propaganda machine. After the death of Kim Il-sung in 1994, 1,000 cranes descended from heaven to take the leader with them. But
그러나 학들은 그분을 모시고 갈 수 없었다. 왜냐하면 온 나라 사람들이 애타게 어버이를 부르며 가슴치고 땅을 치고 몸부림치는 것을 보았기 때문이다.
this story is presented as fact in one of the few books freely available in the bookshops in Korea. And there is more.
10일이 지나서 하늘의 학들은 대성인을 지상에 지어진 천궁에 주무시도록 결정했다.
Kim Il-sung has been lying in his holy mausoleum ever since. An enormous palace where only special guests are allowed to come and see his mummified body. It is absolutely forbidden to film him. His private train and his Mercedes are also on exhibit in this mausoleum. The fairy tales about the most beloved leader and his son were invented by a special propaganda department. Hardly anyone knows exactly what goes on there. We traveled to Seoul in South Korea to meet with a refugee from the north, Chae San-ging. He's under police protection and has assumed a new identity. Before he fled North Korea, he was a propaganda writer for the North Korean government. A journalist officially, he says sarcastically, because the main thing he wrote about was this: swallows. After the death of Kim Il-sung, there was another story involving birds. Thousands of swallows were bowing their heads to the dead leader.
대동군 평양 시내에서 한 60km 정도 나가면 대동군이라는 데가 있는데 그 대동군 금정리에 그 김일서의 그 사적비가 있단 말입니다. 사적비에 그 제비들 뭐 수천 마리가 날아와서 김일서의 죽은 날인데 그러니까 그날 그러니까 김일서의 죽은 지 한 해 되는 날 제비가 수천 마리 날아와서 날아가지 않고 있으니까 빨리 와서 이걸 촬영하라. 그래서 한 개 스탑 데리고서 나갔대는데 나가 보니까 제비가 그 있을 리가 만무하잖아요, 그게. 그렇죠. 그래서 없기 때문에 어떻게 된 게가 물어보니까 제비들 방금 전에 다 날아갔다.
The worst thing about it for Chae was that he was well aware, of course, that all of this was nonsense. But he had to go anyway. With the help of some colleagues, he managed to put enough petrol in the car to make the journey into the country. And of course, there wasn't a swallow in sight. Just to be sure, he asked a couple of farmers.
그래서 그걸 쭉 알아본 과정에 그게 제비가 그 애초에 거기 오지도 않았고 그런 건데 거기 있는 말하자면 거기 다 그런 건 선정부에서 다 하잖아요.
So Chae drove home across a landscape littered with Kim Il-sung slogans and Kim Il-sung monuments. This was the real Korea that Chae knew only too well: poverty and economic deadlock. His wife had died of an illness, his daughter of famine, so he decided to attempt to flee the country with his two remaining daughters. He swam across the river to South Korea, and both he and his daughters survived the snipers. Meanwhile, in the north, the role of the deceased Kim Il-sung had to be taken over by his son, Kim Jong-il. The myth around him had to be elaborated on. There were already a few beautiful stories about Kim Jong-il. He was said to have been born in a shabby mountain cabin. Soldiers stationed in the area had sensed that something wonderful was happening, although they couldn't tell exactly what. They carved a few words in a tree.
길다랗게 껍질이 벗겨진 나무에는 주먹만한 글발들이 새겨져 있었다. 아, 조선아, 백두성 탄생을 알린다.
The tree became a place of pilgrimage to the general public until a group of Japanese scientists came to visit.
그 일본 그 학자들 중에 한 사람 식물학자가 있었던 거네. 근데 나무를 보니까 나무가 그 45년도 이후에 그 자란 나무단 말이에요. 그래서 그 학자가 이 나무가 몇 년도에 자라기 시작한 나무지 않은가. 그러니까 이제 그 여자는 그 해설을 하는 건 다 강사들 있잖아요. 그 해설한 여자가 그건 대답 못 했거든. 이 나무가 47년도부터 자라기 시작한 나무인데 그럼 항일발사는 이 나무가 자라기 전에 와서 여기다 글 써놨는가? 그러니까 말 못하고 그 다음에 그건 아예 없애버렸어요. 거기 다 밑을 나무 잘라버리고 거긴 사람들 가지 못하게 한 이런 일도 있거든.
Such stories are only very rarely refuted. In most cases, the pretense is kept up successfully. From a Western viewpoint, It seems incredible that people actually believe these stories, but in North Korea, they do. It's been the only information that people have been fed for over 55 years. Contact with the outside world is absolutely out of the question, and a select group of people that do know better, like the propaganda workers, are wise enough to keep quiet.
걸리면 그건 자그마한 움직임이라도 있으면 가차없이 그건 처리해버려요. 그런 그 정치적인 건은 그건 뭐 체포영장도 없고 그저 조용히 슬그머니 그저 잡아가고 어디를 가는가 묻지도 못하고 그렇기 때문에 사람들 그 말하자면 공포 그 항시의 그 불안한 감.
Just imagine what it must be like to be told over and over again from early childhood that the leader of your country has supernatural gifts. Eventually, you will become a true believer. It's an art that the North Koreans have perfected by combining indoctrination of the people with complete isolation from the outside world. Any comparison with the rest of the world has become impossible. Moreover, Confucianism makes Koreans extremely deferential to authority and hierarchy. It explains to a large extent why 10-year-old children can hold such firm convictions. In this way, it was possible to strengthen the position of the mythical leader and his son, and when he finally died in 1994, this hero worship reached an absolute climax.
님께서 쌓아올리신 위대한 혁명 업적은 역사와 더불어 천년 만년 길이 빛날 것이다.
시청자 여러분, 위대한 오보이 수령님을 잃은 가슴 아픈 심정들이 노고에 노고를 다 바쳐 오시다가 이렇게 서거하셨다니 정말로 비통한 마음들을 기렸습니다.
독일의 문 앞에 와가지고 이렇게 돌아갔습니다. 저는 이 비밀을 믿고 싶지 않습니다. 온 세계가 깨졌대도 저는 믿고 싶지 않습니다. 아버지 수령님. 동문합니다. 한평생 고생만 하시다가 이렇게 가신다니 이게 웬 말입니까? 어머니 수령님.
In this way, Che's colleagues manipulate the emotions of the North Korean people even today, filling their minds with propaganda about the great Kim Jong-il.
수령님께서는 크게 웃으시며 군중들을 향하여 꽃다발을 흔들자 신기한 일이 벌어졌다. 그러자 주변의 모든 눈들이 일제히 녹아버렸다.
The tour continues. Next is the Historic Museum of the Korean War. More rhetoric teaches us about the heroic deeds of the Korean army, and all of a sudden we're confronted with a gap in our own history writing. Events that never found their way into our Western history books. The cruel misbehavior of American soldiers during the Korean War.
And Harrison, one of the Yankees who crept in Sinton County, said as follows while singing Praise Mothers and Children. It is too happy for the mothers and children to be here together. Lock up the mothers and children apart, to fret the mothers to death and dry the blood of the children to death. So later they poured petroleum over their heads and set fire and threw viciously hand grenades to kill them. So the death of 102 babies and 400 mothers in Xinjiang clearly shows that the U.S. none other than wolves in two legs, with two legs. And there is a British armored car.
But after that, the guide goes full steam ahead once again. In an enormous cellar consisting of numerous compartments, her comments are clearly intended to incite hatred of America and to humiliate the enemy.
In 1952, German bombs. And that plane was shot down by our women, by our ladies. So the size of this picture is 50 meters high and 132 meters wide and 42 meters in diameter, and it takes about 15 minutes to revolve. So it's revolving now, and from here until 13 minutes are the real things, such as trees and rocks. But after 13 minutes are the pictures, but it seems like the real things. Do you agree with me?
Groups of North Korean civilians, among them many children, are forced to visit this exhibition about the Korean War. Five years after Kim Il-sung was helped into the saddle by the Soviet Union, it was indeed this Korean War that enabled the dictator to affirm his absolute leadership in a country. His hatred of the Americans made him the eternal hero of Korea. To fuel this hatred, Kim ordered numerous immense war monuments to be erected for the soldiers who died. The road to the north takes us past endless empty fields, destitute villages and troops moving on foot. In the mountains of Mojiang, we visit the Friendship Palace. It houses a collection of 70,000 gifts from befriended nations all over the world. Outside the palace grounds, thousands of civilians are waiting to be checked by soldiers before they're allowed in. More than likely, this is the only day out they'll be allowed in many years to come. After a careful check of their identity cards, the visitors are marched off to the palace. On their way inside, they pass Chinese tourists, two separate worlds, and yet only 10 years ago the Chinese were in the same situation as the North Koreans are now. Filming in the palace is strictly forbidden. The highway to Kaesong in the south. This was once, and perhaps will be again, the connection to South Korea. The road ends at the border in the demilitarized zone, a strip of 4 kilometers, across which about 1 million soldiers face one another. The two countries are still formally at war.
이렇게 조가가 직접 정보를 맡고 있습니다. 번호 요원이 선생들이 신변 안전을 위해서 우리 군인들이 장경에 동행하게 됩니다. 정세는 여전히 인정합니다.
This is still not. No, doesn't yet come.
Somewhere in no man's land stands the building in which the peace was signed between the Allies and North Korea in 1953. According to the North Koreans, the Americans wanted to sign the treaty in a tent, which the North Koreans refused. So in just 5 days, an army of workers erected this building, at the time the largest in the country. The North Korean captain is not only supervising us, but also a group of Japanese tourists.
그리고 우리 조선 사람들이 미국을 많이 욕하고 그런데 그 조선 사람들이 미국을 반대해서 투쟁하고 욕하는 건 다른 게 없습니다. 5,000년 전부터 한강토에서 한민족으로 살아왔습니다. 이걸 지금 미국이 55년 동안 둘러가려 놓고 있습니다.
Then he turns to his Japanese audience.
우리가 오늘 여기 일본 손님들도 오셨는데 이 터놓고 말하면 이 우리 민족이 지금 갈라져서 고통과 불행 겪고 있는 우리한테는 잘못을 범하는 사람보다 잘못을 고치지 못하는 사람이 더 추하다는 소리가 있습니다. 돌아가서 이거 빨리 다 이거 아시아의 평화를 위해서 그렇고 사진을 발견이 날 거면 우린 우리 나쁘게 생각하는 사람들, 그러니까 미국이 선전 누구 나쁘게 생각하는 그 사람들이 나쁘다고는 생각 안 합니다. 와서 다 보라. 우리 실제 조선 사람들이 어떤 사람들인가 직접 다 보라. 나 자신도 그렇고 우리 조선 사람들은 다 평화를 사랑하는 사람 구가 누구든 다 그저 함께 신선적으로 살 걸 바라고 다 친구로 여기고 있습니다. 물론 피터 선생은 난 아주 평화를 사랑하고 정의로운 사람이라는 걸 알고 있습니다.
Then we're at the border with South Korea. The huts are precisely on the border. North Korean soldiers on this side and South Korean soldiers on the other. They're literally 5 meters from one another.
원래 저 앞에다 미군이 서 있었는데 자꾸 이거 외국인들 이거 동포들 와서 너는 미국 왜 남의 땅 지키나 나가라 자꾸 욕하니까 그다음에 저 사람들 앞에 세워놓고
Negotiations were conducted at this table between the two parties. Then, on the South Korean side, there appears an American soldier. The North Korean captain accompanying us reacts immediately, referring to a horrifying past.
코에다 쇠사슬 끌고 다니다가 달구지를 사지 찢어주게 수미신 중에 있었답니다. 근데 그 배 가르고 태아 다 꺼내고 목을 잘라서 전주대에 매달아서 다수살 났던 그 우리 아버지가 겨우 살았습니다. 그래서 우리에겐 친척이 없습니다. 우리 자식이 다수인데 이 자식이 다 그런 나라를 짓밟히면 그런 운명을 면치마다기 때문에 다 군복을 입고 초소에 서 있습니다.
There's no denying that this North Korean military official has baffled us with his direct manner so completely in contrast with what we've experienced so far. The will to unite with the South is tangible here, even though the two countries are unaware of the many differences that separate them. Only when you visit both countries can you experience the contrast between them. Nowhere else in the world is there such a clear echo of the Cold War. In the North, you can't mention that you intend to visit the South as well, and once in the South, it's unwise to share the information that you've just come from the North.
여기서 찍는 게 아니라 들어가서 찍는 거예요. 안 돼요. 필름 빼기로 돼 있거든요. 지금 열심히 찍고 있잖아요.
At the border, the South is just 3 paces away, but in order to get there, you have to fly over 6,000 miles via Beijing. The differences are obvious. The North is destitute. The economy has ground to a halt. The capitalist economy of the South is expanding rapidly. Or to put it differently, this is North Korea, the capital Pyongyang by night. And this is Seoul in South Korea. But they share a common history, sharing the same ancient culture. Their separation through Cold War has only lasted for 55 years now. Over the past 2 years, there have been 3 occasions of family reunion between North and South. The dramatic reunion of hundreds of family members who haven't met for over 50 years.
이 옆에 어머니랑 같이 있어서 얼마나 좋았어. 이거 이렇게 가슴이 터져. 나 이거 아버지.
오빠는 어디 갔냐? 전쟁 때 오빠는 죽었어요. 나 혼자 살았어요.
In North and South Korea together, there are over 9 million Koreans who have family members living on the other side of the border. They form a crucial element in the discussion about possible reunion, a discussion that gained momentum after the 2 heads of state had met each other. But the South Koreans are biding their time. Professor Chung In-moon is advisor to the president.
Before we achieve any kind of de facto or de jure unification, there got to be increased homogeneity between the two. There got to be increased understanding between the two. And most importantly, North Korean economy should be leveled up in such a way to match the South Korean economy. Then we can truly have unification through mutual consensus.
The gap is still too wide. On top of that, the South Koreans don't really know what is going on in the North. This country testifies to the fallibility of secret services, as a high-ranking CIA official once commented on North Korea. In fact, we know next to nothing about what happens in this reclusive country. We drive along empty roads for hours on end. Left and right, we pass provincial towns. What happens in the country remains a mystery to us. Forbidden territory. The people in the country are suffering in silence and dying. Scenes filmed in secret of people cooking tree bark and clay just to have something in their stomachs. Estimations vary, but at least a few 100,000 people have died already of hunger and disease. In the meantime, our guards take us to our next attraction. This is the North Korea that we are not supposed to see. Enormous improvised cemeteries. An entire generation has been wiped out. Body bags are used up to 3 times because of shortage, and there have been reports of cannibalism. Failed harvests and floods have taken their toll. The consequences were terrible, but they hardly ever reached the outside world. Attempted escapes are still severely punished. These scenes were shot by a Chinese relief organization. The camps are even worse. One of the few people who can give a truthful account of what outsiders will never see is Kim Min-hook. He managed to escape to the south alive and apologizes in advance for the shocking details.
가장 심각한 문제는 큰 범위에서 볼 때는 인권입니다. 인권은 어느 정도냐면요. 2차 대전 때 독일 사람들이 유태인을 아이슈비츠에서 처형한 그런 것보다 더합니다. 이건 평화 시기에 같은 동족을 그저 죽이고 싶으면 죽여버리는 거예요. 심지어 내 실례를 하나 들게요. 수용소에 있던 사람이 증언한 겁니다. 글도 썼고요. 정치범 처녀를 말을 안 듣는다고 몸을 범하고 그렇게 막 제 맘대로 할 뿐만 아니라 죽이기 싶으니까 어떻게 죽이느냐. 여자 음배에다 삽자를 박아서 죽이는 게 지금 북한 상황이에요.
This former pirate state is desperately in search of international recognition, an aim that figures highly on the present government's agenda. Now that more openness is becoming inevitable, the regime is pushing the more unsavory aspects of the dictatorship further inland.
정치범 수용소를 국경에 있던 것들을 다 국내로 옮겼어요. 들킬까 봐. 그렇게 하고 이런 문제에 대한 걸 얘기할까 봐 쉬쉬쉬 하면서 좀 더 감추고 있는 상황이라고요. 두려우니까. 그렇게 하고 자꾸 국제사회에서 떠드니까 이제 너무 많이 잡아가지 말라고까지 지시를 하고 있다고.
South of the border, South Korean tourists are trying to catch a glimpse of what is going on in the north, as the soldiers in the north are often doing in the opposite direction. Formally speaking, North and South Korea are still at war. On both sides of the border, 1 million troops face each other. One false move can cause a chain reaction. Soldiers take us to the front line in the mountains. Until recently, these loudspeakers were used to shout abuse. Now you hear music and a soft female voice. On the other side of the front line are the South Korean observation posts, and the North Korean soldiers see that their opponents have written new slogans on the walls of their barracks. Cautious approach, but the South Koreans profess their willingness to learn from history. The reunion of the two Germanys, to them, is a good example of how not to unite. Once more, the advisor to the president, Professor Chung In-moon.
Korea is not Germany. Okay? We have a cultural, historical, economic, and social differences between Germany and Korea. Therefore, we can make a reference of some important aspect of German unification, but we should take into account the Korean context. For example, German model of unification by absorption, meaning West Germany absorbing East Germany, will not take place in the Korean context, because North Korean elite are aware of German consequences. Therefore, they will try to avoid the East German route to unification. Okay? And also look at the case of Germany. Even after unification, there have been so-called, after the unification, there has been second war between the Eastern and West Germany. Okay? That has something to do with hasty unification without really healing the fractured pain of heterogeneity and division. Okay? And the result was a new type of social stratification and emerging social conflict within Germany.
Somewhere else at the front line, North Korean soldiers point out to us a phenomenon that the world doesn't know about. The Korean Wall, built by the South to ward off possible invasion from the North. Strangely enough, this phenomenon is public knowledge in North Korea, but a well-kept secret in the South. More curious still is the fact that the wall can't even be seen from the South. The South Koreans have erected sand hills and planted shrubs to block the view.
이 건축장벽 밑넓이가 10m 19m, 높이가 5에서 8m, 옷넓이가 3m 7m. 이 장벽에는 무수한 하점과 감시대들이 배치되어 있고, 우리나라를 영원히 두 개 나라로 갈라놓고 이 장벽을 만들고.
The South Koreans have always denied the existence of the wall, But our eyes are not deceiving us here. Brothers who never knew each other, the North Korean leader Kim Jong-il and the South Korean president Kim Dae-jung. Economic equality is a first requirement. The similarities between the two peoples will certainly help to achieve just that. South Koreans worship the father figure as part of their Confucian tradition as well. In South Korea, this unassailable status is enjoyed by the presidents of multinationals like Hyundai. This is Chun Yung-jung in his late 80s and a living god to the South Koreans. He was born in North Korea, but in his youth he fled to the south and built one of the largest concerns of the country, Hyundai. He's been back to the north several times now and is amazed about how little people in the north know about the south. His spokesman, Kim Young-kyu, mentions just one example.
If we send one car, a Hyundai car there, they see, watch the car very thoroughly, the bottom and up, and then you make this? Oh yeah, Hyundai made. They misunderstood it from, Japan or something like that. They don't know completely South Korea.
Unlike the aging tycoon who knows the North, he wanted to make a gesture that the North Koreans would understand, so he made them a gift of 1,001 cows. In Red Cross trucks, they were driven across the border past the negotiating barracks. It is this kind of cautious gesture that has to clear the way to reunion. And the economic development that has to precede reunion is under construction already, by Hyundai, of course. Hyundai have a proven track record when it comes to building quickly.
We are going to build one airport here, and then, we are going to construct a railroad from directly from Seoul to Gyeongbuk Mountain. This is the next phases. This is industrial park, and then this is the city, new city. Okay, we are going to build, construct this railroad and the road within 1 year.
Back in Pyongyang, we have to get used again to the utopian image that is created there in spite of economic misery. We continue our tour and pay a visit to the Central Library. And again, our tour guide is word perfect.
These books are sent by the great leader Comrade Kim Il-sung and the dear leader Comrade Kim Il-sung.
With great pride, we are shown books from the West, computer guides from 1985.
We must translate and record all the scientific and technical books to help working peoples who are not good at foreign languages.
Right.
So, if the readers want to read the books, the librarians give this kind of foreign books, and together with the tape recorder. So this is the foreign book, and this is the recorded tapes of translated machines. So the working peoples who are not good at foreign languages look this book while listening to the tape recorder. By the help of these recorded tapes of translated machines, the working peoples can fully understand about these contents.
Mm-hmm. 현상에 기초한 권면 복사 GALS 발광 이국 소자에서의 파장 조조를 추구하였다.
In here, we also give lectures on new basic science. So before lecture, we widely inform the title, date, time, place, lecturer, through television, newspaper, broadcasting of the country. So the working peoples who want to take part in this lecture, all the working peoples can take part in this lecture.
Outside, in the Kim Il-sung Square, the children are still practicing their 6 hours a day for the mass manifestation, the usual picture in Pyongyang. On the last day, we climbed the 150-meter-high Yuchi Tower. Above, you hear the sounds of exercises on all sides. Only now do we see that the children in the Kim Il-sung Square are forming Korean characters. The children probably don't even know themselves what word they are making. For all its theatrics, this capital cannot hide the emptiness of the country. It's a country in ruins. Even so, in Pyongyang, the carefully selected inhabitants keep on performing for visitors that never visit. During the evening, there's yet another interruption in the power supply. Only the Yuchi Tower remains permanently illuminated. North Korea. It's the year Yuchi 89 according to the Kim Il-sung calendar. A better future seems a long way off.
Hey!